Step into the eerie realm of Paranormal M, where every tale is a chilling reminder of the supernatural forces that surround us. Join us as we unravel the mysteries of the unknown and delve into the ghostly and unexplained. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to be part of our thrilling exploration. What would happen if you were to see this? Now, I wasn't sure if this could be considered as paranormal or not. Plus, I wanted this to be What would happen if you were to see this? Now, I wasn't sure if this could be considered as paranormal or not. Plus, I wanted this to be a question, but I had to put gore instead since I wasn't having anything to do with medical with organs. But long story short, my mom had an enlarged heart and soon passed away due to cardiac arrest. I thought it was her disease that was the cause of her breathing problems and chest pains. I was in the room speaking to the doctor, and as I left, a nurse spoke to me of what she saw during the autopsy. The enlarged heart and dilated aneurysms were removed. There, she said, as the pathologist placed it on the table, he went out to get a drink or something. But as he did so, she was doing her report on the computer, till she saw the heart start to thump really hard by itself. At first, she was curious to see it happen, as she had never seen anything like this. Till it began beating irregularly. She thought she was going crazy, but as she gotten close to my mom's enlarged heart, it was like for a good few minutes. The nurse said that she could see the instruments on the table shaking due to the pounding and hearing a disembodied heart, believing that it was possessed by something, until the pathologist arrived back where it stopped. Now, I thought it was hogwash, as she was probably pulling my leg. She was maybe exhausted with all the work. Now, there could be some explanation about this, as it's probably temporarily jump-started until stopping again. Since it was a wall-to-wall globular enlarged heart with multiple dilated aneurysms of her SCV, aorta, and pulmonary artery. But I've wondered, could spirits or souls or apparitions possess organs? I think I should tell the whole story. It happened at the end of July of this year, on Friday the 28th. I had to admit my mom to the ER very early in the morning, like around 5. Since she was having chest pains and having breathing problems due to her condition, and her being a slim woman. I mean, she had this condition for 17 years since the growth developed. Since we didn't really have any health insurance, we just did the best we could. As they took her in, they gave her a chest x-ray, and later an MRI. And what they found was that she had a wall-to-wall globular enlarged heart, multiple aneurysms of her blood vessels, and one in particular was her thoracic aortic aneurysm. It was literally the size of a grapefruit, and her pulmonary artery aneurysm was huge. But what stunned them was that she had a rare fusiform superior vena cava aneurysm that patients have. However, they took her in, and just later that night, she passed away from cardiac arrest. Stupid me, I had to place my head on her chest to hear her heart beating in agony. This is where I got to hear the final beats of her heart, due to what's called a gonal rhythm, as the poor thing was still giving some weak beats after she passed. I was devastated when it happened, and I blamed myself. But 2 days later, I went back to the hospital. I got a call from the doctor to meet him at the hospital, so I did, and arrived in the morning. I came and waited. I got a call from the nurse to go meet with them. As I entered the hallway, I was met with a sheer cold. Now, I wasn't sure if it was coming from the AC, but hot damn, I was forgetting to bring my sweater. However, I was alone in the hallway, where I began to hear this throbbing or pulsating sound emanating from within the hallway. At first, I thought it was coming from the AC vents, but I didn't see any when I was walking as this pulsating sound was becoming audible in volume. The more I got close to the room, the more I heard this throbbing pulse. But as I got to the door and opened it, it stopped. It was something that I believe was the weirdest thing ever to hear. Of course, I was tired at that time and didn't even eat breakfast or have any coffee. I met the doctor and we talked about what happened as he laid out the details of the condition that my mom had, presented me with my mom's heart. I was flabbergasted and shocked as I saw the sheer size of this oversized organ. He told me that the pathologist was a big guy, but even holding it with bare hands, he was stunned by its size and weight. I once thought it weighed 706 grams, but it turned out to be over 810. There I saw the globular enlarged heart with its fusiform superior vena cava aneurysm, thoracic aortic aneurysm, which was literally the size of a grapefruit, and the pulmonary artery aneurysm. I mean, at first glance, you wouldn't think it was even a human heart. But sadly, since it was cardiomegaly or cardiomyopathy, I could understand why. Now I held it, as it was heavy, to say the least. Anyhow, as I finished speaking to him, I was met with this nurse in the hallway, as she explained that she was with the pathologist when he did his autopsy. Well, more like removing the heart and the vessels. This nurse elaborated that when the pathologist removed the entire thing from my mom's chest, the two of them were stunned to see the size of it, that she couldn't see both of his hands as my mom's heart was that big. However, he couldn't put it on the tray. The Bosnia kidney basin tray wasn't big enough. So she told me to place it on the table with the surgical instruments. Went to get something to drink. She continued on in telling me that when the pathologist left the room, she was doing her report on the computer, but at that moment she heard something banging on the table. And when she looked, it was my mom's enlarged heart that was the cause of this banging. And what shocked her was that the heart was beating by itself. As she got close to it, the heart, she said, it began to beat very hard on the table, shaking the instruments on it. Now, of course, there was some sort of explanation for it. However, she said that she heard the disembodied heartbeat and the heart itself was still pounding hard. But it wasn't just it. The same applied to the aneurysms. The aorta, the SVC, and the pulmonary artery aneurysms were pulsating in synchrony with it. There, she explained, it lasted like a good 20 minutes or more. She was wondering if the heart was possessed by my mom's spirit, or by some other entity, till she felt her own heart pounding hard in her chest. The pathologist arrived, and there, it immediately stopped. Now, she was sweating as she finished her story. Of course, I had to take it with a grain of salt, as I wasn't sure if she was pulling my leg or she was tired from the hours she had been working, but there could have been an explanation, or maybe there couldn't have been, for why it was like that. However, when I arrived home, nothing happened. Later that night, I began to hear throbbing, pulsating sounds coming from the inside of my house. It happened around 11 at night. So I checked outside to see if it was the AC that was making that sound, but it wasn't. Then I walked around my house to see where the sound was coming from. Didn't find anything. When I re-entered, that's where I heard the sound of this throbbing pulse. When I found where it was coming from, it was emanating from my mom's room. I continued to hear this sound every night until I began to hear it twice, one around 11 and a second around 3 in the morning. Now, I wasn't sure if this was paranormal or something, but I haven't seen any apparitions, entities, or ghosts, just the disembodied sound of a beating heart. The more I think about it, the more I think that nurse was actually telling the truth. A moment that reoccurs frequently. I have this memory that keeps coming back, and I believe that on that day something could have happened that didn't. Let me explain. I was young. We would often go fishing near a canal for fun. While walking along the canal, we found a place with a metal bridge, and below there was a drop of at least 30 meters with large fish swimming. We settled there to try to catch one, but for a reason I don't understand, we decided to cross the bridge from the wrong side. So I was hanging on with my back facing the void. When we reached the middle of the bridge, I had a flash of falling. I no longer had the strength to continue to the end, so I told my friend that we needed to turn back, but he didn't understand why we would turn back. There was still half the path to go. Nevertheless, he'd listened to me. And sometimes, even today, I dream of that particular moment with the feeling that I made the right choice. I had a bad premonition. It seems like my soul is trying to remind me of that moment. Perhaps because I made a decision that may have saved my life. In the end, my body or my soul still connects me to that specific moment in history, so that I remember it. Do you know anything about the case of Dr. Regis? Hey folks, I'm looking for info on a story my 89-year-old grandma shared. She lives in a small village in Wisconsin, and back in 2015 she mentioned that when she was returning home, there was a police blockade blocking a street, preventing anyone from passing. The officers refused to tell her what was going on, but she spotted FBI agents in the distance. She's always been curious about what happened because the road led to a house of a highly respected doctor in the village, and now everything's sealed off. She remembers there was a park next to the farm that's been off limits for years too. I told her that nowadays, with the internet and platforms like Reddit, you might find some info, but I'm clueless on where to start looking. All she could tell me is that the farm's been family-owned since like the 1950s and belonged to a Dr. Regis, but I haven't found anything. My grandma isn't familiar with the internet, but if you have questions or need clarification, I can always give her a call to see if anything comes to mind. I find this whole thing intriguing, and maybe she unwittingly witnessed some under-the-radar intervention. Not sure if that's a thing, but wouldn't be surprised. My granddad attacked me. This happened 2 years ago in a home we previously lived in. This was during the pandemic. I come from an Indian household, so you can imagine fights between the kid and the parent is common. One night, me and my dad fought over something, and I told something very rude and went into my room. The house was designed in such a way that the living room is in between the two bedrooms. They're on either side of it. So if you look from one end of the room, you can look straight into the other one. So yeah, I went and laid and I was watching YouTube till 2 a.m. I heard my dad wake up, so I pretended to be asleep. I heard his footsteps coming toward my room. I was still pretending. The footsteps stopped exactly near my foot of the bed. I was hearing his breathing sounds. He stood there for 5 to 6 minutes, and I heard his footsteps go back toward his room. Then I fell asleep. The next day I woke up and I had a burning sensation on my shoulder. When I checked it out, there was a scratch on my shoulder. Later I asked my dad about why he was just standing still the previous night in my room. He replied that he never woke up last night. He doesn't have any sleepwalking problems. I believe that was my granddad, and he scratched me because my granddad passed away when my dad was like 17. My dad was very attached to him. Sometimes my dad used to come home at 2 to 3 because of work and used to be very tired. The next day he used to tell me that he felt someone was giving his leg a massage last night, whereas my mom wasn't even getting up. And when he used to come at that time, she's even denied it multiple times. Hence, my dad came to a conclusion that it was Dad looking over him. So yeah, that led me to believe that it was my granddad telling me not to give his son a hard time, scratched my shoulder as a punishment. Flower food. A few years ago now, I'm not sure how many at this point, but I was partying with some friends in our apartment complex. We drank, we smoked, the whole crew was there. That night our friend, and we'll call her Nikki, she had her brother, who we'll call Chris, come out to hang out with us, because he was going through a divorce and was having a hard time with things. As we drank and smoked, Chris didn't touch much, just enjoyed the company as we watched a movie and had some laughs. As the party ended, though, Chris left, only to come back a little later to drop something off and say his goodbyes to everyone. He didn't make it home that night. No one knows what happened, but his car flipped and he was trapped inside as it caught fire. Nikki called and texted me late into the night to tell me that her brother had just died. I remember saying that surely she must have had another brother because Chris was sober. There was no way it could have been him. We mourned him for a while. Still loved, and in our thoughts always. I remember I'd take to his obituary pamphlet from time to time, tell him how much Nikki loved and missed him. Time went on, and another of our friends came to visit, bringing me a messy bushel of sunflowers she pulled from a field for me. I set them up in a vase in my empty windowsill and let them be. Some odd time had passed, minutes, maybe an hour. Came back to my window to peek outside, only to find a neatly laid packet of flower food set beside my vase. "Hey, I thought you said you grabbed these from a field." My friend nodded to me. "Yeah, I saw them on the way here and thought you'd like them." We looked up at each other for a minute, and I held up the packet of flower food to show her. "Dude, where did you come from? Where did this come from?" We talked about it for a minute and boiled it down to, "Man, that's crazy." Later that night, sitting outside with our friends, I started telling Nikki about this mysterious flower food. Immediately, she cracked a smile. "That sounds just like my brother always harping about that damn flower food." I like to think he'd left it there for me. I kept those sunflowers alive for as long as I could, enjoying the thought that, just maybe, Chris had been thinking about us. Rest in peace. We miss you. The Night the Gnomes Came for Me, a childhood saga. When I was just a baby, my uncle, a senior sergeant and no-nonsense type, held me in his arms one evening in his backyard. He pointed to a garden gnome and jokingly warned, "That comes comes alive at night and gets you. I was too young to remember this, of course, but my mother swears that she had to comfort me and scold him. As I grew older, I began to experience intense recurring nightmares. In these dreams, gnomes would appear, small, sinister versions of the garden ornaments mocking and taunting me. The dreams were so vivid they began to blur the lines between sleeping and waking reality. One night stands out among all the others. As I lay in bed, the full moon shone brightly through my window. In my half-asleep state, I saw a gnome seemingly detached from the lunar surface. It was rapidly gliding down into my room. Despite being on the second floor, its face was grotesque, twisted into an evil sneer that sent shivers down my spine. The moment it landed, I woke up, the terror of its presence still lingering. But it wasn't until the night I fought back that everything changed. In what would be the climax of these horrifying visitations, the gnomes gave me an impossible task: to put on a pair of wet socks in 2 minutes or be taken away. I could hear the hum of what sounded like a vehicle ready to transport me to an unknown fate. I struggled with the socks, their laughter piercing the air, counting down the seconds. Then a surge of anger empowered me. I grabbed one of the gnomes by its pointy hat, and it felt unnervingly real and warm, yet rigid like the actual garden statue. In a fit of defiance, I hurled it to the ground and it shattered, the fragments scattering as the gnomes scattered with them. I'll never forget their faces twisted in fear, as if this wasn't supposed to happen. Others looked on angrily. That was the last night they visited me. Whatever my uncle's words had set in motion all those years ago, it felt like I had ended it that night. But it left me with unending questions. Was it just an overactive childhood imagination spurred on by a scary suggestion? Or had I somehow broken a rule in the game? I didn't even know I was playing one. I never had another night terror about gnomes. Since that night, the terror stopped, but the mystery of what's happened remains. Was this a child's imagination fueled by a frightening seed planted by my uncle's words? Or did I tap into something beyond understanding? Today I still feel an uneasy connection to those stone figures peering out of the neighborhood gardens. I can't help but wonder if anybody else has experienced anything similar. Or if the gnomes chose me for reasons that I may never understand. Can't shake the feeling that there was more to these experiences than mere dreams. I heard a tapping in my room. A few years ago, I got really into watching scary ghost adventure videos on YouTube. I figured most of it was made up and exaggerated. I grew up with tales and stories about the paranormal that my mom and aunts experienced. My cousins all say that they've had encounters as well. I never really saw anything, except the feeling like I shouldn't go into a room, don't continue down that path, or don't go around that corner. Anyways, after watching scary stuff on YouTube and researching paranormal stuff online, one night I woke up to a loud tapping in my room. I felt super nervous. I gathered my thoughts and I waited for the tapping to stop. I felt like it was never going to end. I reached for my phone to check the time. 3:33. My heart sank and I got really sweaty. I then decided to be brave. I jumped out of my bed and turned on my phone. I followed the sound to the top corner of my closet. Then it just stopped. Thought it might have still been roaming in the house or something, so I walked out into the hallway and all through the house. I noticed my roommate's bedroom light on. I felt relieved. The next morning I went to work and the world seemed quieter and calm, almost muffled. I called my sister and she told me I was probably emitting or feeling that energy out into the world. I decided I had enough, stopped watching videos and reading posts on here. Later that day I saw my roommate and asked him if he was tapping on the wall at 3 a.m. He said he was. So I felt dumb, but just in case, I stopped being so curious. High strangeness in a childhood home. My family moved around a lot when I was a child, mainly due to my dad's job. We moved 4 to 5 times before I was 6 years old. My mom wanted some stability for the family, which at this point comprised of her, my dad, myself, and my younger brother. So in 1994, my old man went and bought an old derelict farm that was situated in a rural area in the southwest of the UK. It was about a mile from the nearest village and a quarter-mile from our neighbors. He purchased it at the property auction. We had no prior viewing, just the pictures on display at the auction house. This place was really old and comprised of a few large fields and 2 interconnected yards filled with outbuildings in a derelict house. I had been working on a farm in various forms for 500 years or so. Or it, not I. So the house itself was 250 years old. We spent a year living elsewhere whilst the renovations took place, but would often go there at weekends to run around and play. The first day we entered the dusty, half-collapsed 2-story house, we realized that the previous occupants had left loads of their stuff behind. The house had been vacated 25 or 30 years prior. Everything was dusty, moldy, and falling to pieces. Some of the highlights were dressing tables filled with old clothes and makeup. A wall in one room was plastered with rosettes won in equine competitions. Hanging from the banister at the top of the stairs were a row of small string nooses covered in fur. It's a barbaric but not uncommon way for farm folk to get rid of unwanted kittens, apparently. Now, this wasn't paranormal in any way, but Jesus Christ, it was unnerving to see an already creepy-looking house with that in it. I would take too far long to list everything that happened, so I'll list some highlights below before ending with what I consider to be the strangest occurrence. Loud bangs, loud enough to make you think somebody tipped over a wardrobe or something. Footsteps running up and down long wooden hallways. Cold spots and breezy points throughout the house that changed from day to day. One night my grandparents were house-sitting, and before they went to bed they did a quick look check. One room at the end of the house was filled with thick mist. It was a clear night, all doors and windows were shut, and the mist was exclusive to that room. They noped out of there and stayed in their own place that night. The next day everything was back to normal. After living there for 6 months, my mom actually called the village priest in to bless the place. We weren't a religious family, but she was really at a loss on how to cope with everything. Priest arrived and they proceeded to sprinkle holy water in every room of the house. Once that was done, Mom walked out to his car, and as soon as they got out of the house, he turned to her and said, "There's an incredibly dark presence in this house. I'm never setting foot here again. I don't know what to suggest. I'm really sorry. Good luck." Then he got into his car and sped off. He had apparently been fairly neutral during the blessings, but as soon as he got out of the house, he went pale. His whole demeanor changed instantly. Things got more chill after a medium came around, told Mom to kind of embrace it, which she did. there was always this nagging feeling that you were never alone. It didn't feel malevolent. It felt observational, and sometimes sad in a wistful way. Still very strange. Anyway, the weirdest thing that happened actually occurred during the renovation phase. Dad and his work crew had removed all the old possessions from the house, made a huge bonfire in the yard. They burned it over the course of a few days until it was just a steaming pile of ash. The following weekend, my mom took me and my bro over to a picnic and run around. We were feral little bastards. We needed it. At one point, Mom sat in a chair not far from the bonfire and noticed an envelope on the big mound of ash. Despite being in the center of this pile, the envelope had inexplicably not burned up. Mom could tell there was something heavier than paper in the envelope. When she opened it up, an amethyst crystal dropped out along with a letter. The date of the letter was sometime in the early 60s. It was written by the childhood sweetheart of a girl who'd lived at that house with her parents. It was a letter of condolence to the parents. Turns out the girl had sadly committed suicide in her room when she was around the age of 18. Her ex-boyfriend had heard about it, sent the parents a really sweet letter expressing his love, grief, and condolences. He also sent the amethyst crystal, as that was the girl's favorite stone. My bedroom had been the girl's room, and this was evident from the contents that we first got there. My wardrobe was in the corner by the window looking out over the farm. I could never linger there for too long. That part of the room just felt unpleasant and tense. I've since wondered if that's the spot where the girl took her life. I guess the story of the letter isn't very paranormal, but the fact that the letter survived the bonfire is wild to me. So yeah, we lived there for 6 years or so, then moved again after my parents split up. The house has changed hands at least twice in the last 20 years. I live about 2 hours from this place nowadays, and my girlfriend and I are really tempted to go visit and see how it's doing. I'm sure the owners would love to be regaled with odd anecdotes about the property. Just to clarify, aside from the weird feelings and random bangs and noises, my brother and I were largely unaware of things that happened. We were only told later in life, thank God. Two strange experiences in one night, circa 2009. Back in 2009, when I was in my early 20s, I'd often go on late-night walks with a friend. We lived in a seaside town in the UK, and our walks would take us around the outskirts of the town and past a big estuary. We only drank on weekends, and these particular events took place midweek while we were stone cold sober, for what it's worth. We set off from my mom's house around 9 p.m., and after walking for 30 minutes or so, we stopped to pet a cat. We were beside a building that had a big glass front. I was stroking the cat, and when my friend said, "Fucking hell, that's creepy, look in that window," I glanced up, and there was an old man sat bolt upright in a chair at the back of the room in complete darkness. He was just staring outside. We watched him for a short while, and he went completely still. My friend even pondered whether the guy was dead. We eventually moved on, and after that, our night got even stranger. We made our way past the town's dump, out through a close, and around the town's boat, toward the estuary. It would have been nearly 10:30 at this point. We wandered past some really lavish houses that, overlooked the estuary, and then arrived at the narrow wooded lane that goes right down to the estuary. Normally on this walk, we'd just ignore the lane and keep going past the houses. We would go to the top and then back into town. But on this night, we decided to wander down to the water's edge. As soon as we set foot in the lane, it immediately got darker due to the tree coverage on each side. The only source of light was at the end of the lane. We were completely silent, just trudging down the lane. And the feeling was fucking horrible. Cold and apprehension out of nowhere. As we got to within 20 yards of the water, we both stopped at exactly the same time with no communication. I was staring at a shape that I could make out down at the bottom of the lane. At first I thought it was a signpost, but as my eyes focused, it seemed to look more like a broad figure with a big head that stood about 7 or 8 feet in height. I was trying to rationalize in my head when my friend broke the silence and said, "Do you see that thing down there?" I replied with "yeah." And without any further communication, we both turned and dashed back up the lane. It was only 20 seconds or so until we got to the street, but the whole time the back of my neck was cold and I felt like I was being chased. Once back on the street, we began walking, thankfully for the streetlights lining the pavement. At this point, we started talking again, too. Both not only saw the same thing, but we also felt the cold and the sensation of being chased. We remarked on how, without communicating, we both instinctively turned tail, got out of there as fast as possible. We both described seeing the same eerie shape of what appeared to be something bipedal. And it was absolutely massive, shrouded in darkness like a shadow. Yet there were no shadows down there because of the tree coverage. It was almost blacker than the shadow, if that makes sense. There was like a density to that dark shape, like a void. We went back to my place and watched South Park to wind down. My mate then left, and I insisted on him texting me when he got home, which as 2 young men is something we never did, male privilege and all that. Now, I had an appointment at a mobile retinal scanning clinic the next day, and this happened to be taking place in a car park next to the house that we saw the old man in. I went to this appointment and met up with another friend who lived nearby. As we rounded the corner, I glanced at the house, and it was completely empty. No furniture or anything. I mentioned to my friend about what I'd seen that night before, and she said, "Well, that's weird because my mom used to clean for the old couple that lived there. Died a few years ago, and it's been empty ever since." My only paranormal experience, and a really good one. Mine was about 30 years ago, and it's the only real paranormal experience I've ever had. I, along with 2 friends, moved into an old Californian-style bungalow house in 1910. It was a 3-bedroom house. We were all about 25 years old at that time. It was located in the inner city and had an adjoining massive workshop/shed that used to be a mechanic shop and a petrol station. It had a petrol Bowser on the footpath back to the 1920s. The monthly rental was quite cheap for the area and the size of the block, although the workshop was only used for storage now, and the owner had a fair bit of junk in it too. Ow. One night at about 8 p.m., I was sitting in my bedroom at the desk, which was next to the door, which was open. This opened onto the main hallway. At the right of my door was the main entrance to the house from the outside. Across was another bedroom, and to the left the hall split in 2 directions. One to the lounge room and the other went to the kitchen. The kitchen was at the back of the house and also had a back door, which... My guitar keeps falling on me. The kitchen was at the back of the house and also had a back door, which led to the backyard, and across the yard was a massive old mechanic shed. Because we lived in the inner city, our security was OTT. The back door had 3 deadbolts and a chain latch. It was always locked, as it was winter and the backyard was wet and muddy. both my housemates were out that night. I was playing a game on my PC when I saw a guy walk down the hall about 5 feet in front of me. I said, "Hey." He stopped briefly, turning his head ever so slightly. He was wearing blue jeans and a red plaid patterned shirt. He was about 20 years old, had a lovely blonde shoulder-length hair. As I was playing a game, I didn't fully engage with him, but when I noticed he stopped, I then said, "How's it going?" Then I returned to viewing the monitor with the game I was playing. Thought it was a friend of one of my housemates and expected to see one of them walk past shortly after, but no one did. This guy may have looked at me, but since I returned my gaze back to the screen, I'm not 100% sure. Then he just slowly walked down the hall and into the kitchen. I then realized that I never heard the front door open, and all of a sudden every hair on my body sharply rose up. I said, "Hello?" Still got no response. Then I walked into the kitchen to see who this guy was. No one there. He couldn't have come back out without me seeing him, and the back door had 3 locked deadbolts on it. I was so shocked but curious too. I spent the next half of an hour watching around the house. I went out to the backyard, the shed, and saw no one. A week later, I went across the road from our house to the barber shop to get a haircut. The barber had been in business for generations. His father and his father before him ran the business. I told him the story, and he called his father in from out of the back of the shop. His father told me that back in the 1940s, when the mechanic shop was in full operation, a young man was working under a car which was on a hoist. It malfunctioned, and the young man was killed. Quite a few previous residents had seen this young man in the house. They got scared and moved out, hence the cheap rent. We stayed for another 2 years, but I never saw him again. I was so disappointed. I would have loved to have seen him again and even tried to communicate with him. I've never seen anything paranormal since. As far as ghosts go, this was so believable. He had a solid form. He acknowledged me when I spoke to him by stopping and turning his head. I just wish I kept looking at him more, and I wish I had more encounters like that. 1 per lifetime is way too few. Not fair. I've been ripped off. I live in this tree. This was a while back when I and my twin sister were 7 years old. I live in this tree. This was a while back when I and my twin sister were 7 years old. We're now adults, so bear with me on the details. I've been wanting to tell this experience to people for a long time, but didn't know where to post it until now. So this happened when me and my identical twin were 7 years old and playing t-ball. It was near sundown. We already ran far from our mom's line of sight playing around the oak trees by the park fence. This was until we heard the voice of a young girl above us. We both looked up and saw this girl the same age as us, maybe younger, sitting on a tree branch looking down at us. She was wearing an old white dress and had long black hair that reached to her back or thighs. Like regular children, we thought nothing of how she dressed. We just focused on, a new friend to play with. We played with her for about an hour, till our mom told us it was time to leave and we said our goodbyes. Until I turned around last second and asked her, "Hey, why are you in that tree?" She gave me the most dead-on stare I've ever seen in my life and said, "I live in this tree." I was so confused on what she meant until my mom yells, "Girls, let's go!" I faced my mom quickly, about to point out our new friend that we made, and the young native girl disappeared. All that was left was a piece of some sort of metal on the ground, where she was. And me and my twin sister just booked it to her mom, not wanting to make her wait any longer. As we left, I looked out the car window one more time and saw the young native girl one more time, sitting in the branches of the tree, facing us with her long black hair flowing in the wind. That's the last time we ever saw her at that park. The Shoebox Killer. In my town, we have Shoebox Annie. Shoebox Annie lived in the 1920s through the 1950s. She would go around trying to sell people things like hand soap out of shoeboxes. If you invited Annie into your house, she would steal your things. The only way to get rid of her was to buy one of her hand soaps. Neighbors would often report horrible smells coming from Annie's house. The reality is that Annie and her son were killing people, temporarily burying their bodies in the basement until later dismembering them in the bathtub, burning them with acid. The original house of Shoebox Annie was burned down, however. Across from where our old house was is now referred to as the Shoebox Annie house, as people of the area claim that that's where her spirit's taken residence. Sometimes you'll see the spirit of Annie standing in the upstairs window. Sometimes people smell weird smells coming from the house. It's said that everybody who's gone into this Shoebox Annie house never comes out. The house was boarded up almost 30 years ago. This is real. Working at elder care. To save you the time, I'm just going to be as quick as possible. I don't believe in ghosts nor paranormal stuff. I think that most of the stuff on Reddit are fictional and made up. But here is my experience from working at elder care. My shift always ended at 11 p.m. So at 10:30 p.m., the corridors are always silent and dark. Everyone is asleep, and we were just sitting in our office and sipping some tea, me and my colleague. We had motion detectors in every room installed, and they're connected to our working phones, and we can see live feed from the phones. All of a sudden at 10:35, I get a notification of movement in a patient room. I was only 19, and I told my older colleague that there was no way in hell that I'm going there to check it out on my own. At the beginning, I wasn't expecting much, because patients do move at night, so it's normal. So what we did instead is we opened our phone to see the image that was taken when the movement was detected. Upon opening the app, I see a picture of a weird object in the middle of the room. It was kind of floating. The object cannot be described. It had legs, wide in the middle. I don't know if it had a head. I froze and my colleague did too. I took screenshots, we ran to the room, and when we went inside, the patient was sleeping. Nobody was in the middle. The morning after, I showed the images to my bosses. They couldn't believe it. They weren't shocked either. They say it's elder care, and it's a haunted place. I don't know if I still have the picture. Can't post it here either, due to Swedish privacy policy. Privacy policy. The picture shows the identity of a patient as well. Also, the section I worked in was only the people with severe dementia that couldn't walk. Why are you just standing there? So some backstory. We live in a mobile home. It's 12 by 30, not very big. Kitchen combined bedroom separated by a door to the hallway. We have a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old. For the moment, we're taking turns sleeping on the couch with the baby in a cot in our sitting room. Baby room pending renovation. Our 3-year-old co-sleeps with us in our bedroom. Last night was my night on duty. My 3-year-old comes out every night when it's my turn. Nothing unusual there. Except last night at 2:50 a.m. I heard him running out crying to me, followed by my partner behind him. It was dark, so I could just see my partner standing in the doorway in his orange shirt. Well, I just assumed it was him.
Though I couldn't see his features, it was dark with only the LEDs in the back of our TV lighting up the room. TV's like 5 feet away, behind a partition with a small open arch midway up the wall, TV facing away from the door. I tucked my little boy in beside me and sat up, looking at my partner. I shook my head at him, and our boy running out just didn't respond. I sat there thinking why he's just standing there looking at me. He then proceeded to step back and turn sideways behind the door while bending forward looking in. Still thinking, what the hell is he doing? The idiot either came in or went back to bed. Until the realization hit me about 3 minutes later that my partner went to bed in a black t-shirt, and that was indeed not him standing there in the orange shirt. I jumped up to close the door, and as I approached, it just disappeared. When my partner got up for work at 6, he said he didn't even know our son got up last night, and he was indeed still in his black shirt. As I said, living in a mobile home, you hear, kind of feel every footstep, especially my partner. He's very heavy-footed, but there was nothing, just silence, no footsteps. Nothing only from my little boy running out to me. So spirit, or whatever, it was creepy as hell to me. Let's see if it happens again. My real-life stories. Story 1, to cut it short, was around 2007 or 2008. Sunday around 10, 11 in the morning. 3 of us. Students in a small living room in a rented apartment, watching a TV show about paranormal activities. We should have known better. The documentary ends when a packet of tobacco jumped out of the vase, 20 or 30 centimeters high, which was on top of a 2-meter-high large TV stand, with cabinet, closet, everything across the whole wall, fell onto the coffee table, approximately in the middle of it. After a few seconds, the same package fell to the floor all by itself. We surely didn't touch it. The table was a meter from us, and the TV an additional meter from the coffee table. The 3 of us sitting next to each other, pale as flour, just looked at each other. They ran away from the apartment after a minute. I stayed for the next 6 hours until my roommate came from home. Given the situation, I called the owner of the apartment and asked him if he had any complaints from the former tenants. It turned out that we were the first to rent the apartment. We entered the apartment in April. His mother was seriously ill and died in that room at the beginning of January, same year, just a couple of months before the event. Story 2. When taking our son to sleep when he was 2 or 3 years old, a story was always read before going to sleep. Suddenly every evening the chandelier would sway gently while reading, both to me and my wife. One evening my wife calls me into the room. They're in bed. The little one is sitting next to her, looking at the chandelier and saying, "Grandpa, Grandpa." I pulled out a picture of my grandfather somewhere, and the little one points to it and repeats, "Grandpa." The little one was born a good 10 or 15 years after my grandfather died, in the same house. To this day, and after the renovation, all the doors and windows are closed. Here and there, I feel a cold wind in the passage, like when someone passes by you. It's Grandpa, so I don't worry. Every now and then, just for fun, when I get the feeling that we're not alone, I just say, "Hello, Grandpa," and continue with my thing. I did a little research after that. Some scientists claim that when children are young, they're on a higher level in dimension, that they see what adults can't. Also, the local story says that not far from me, a bride died not long after her wedding in a car crash. For a good 10 or 15 years, people regularly claimed that they saw the silhouette of a woman in a wedding dress during night driving the very same curve she passed away. I'm not religious, but I believe there are various spirits and paranormal activities. Maybe we're limited to these dimensions, but in others that sometimes merge with ours, our God knows what is lurking around. ghost trying to wake me up? Possibly. Once in a great while, my bed shakes so subtle, but enough to wake me up when I'm sleeping. It happened twice, and may possibly happen again. The area I live in is in New York, right outside of Buffalo. It's not prone to earthquakes. I'm a 21-year-old male and I live with my mom. One day I woke up to someone or something shaking my bed. Felt like someone was shaking my bed trying to wake me up. Thought it was my mother trying to wake me up. But when I woke up, it was like early in the morning, 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. I woke up to darkness. Nothing there, but my bed was still lightly shaking. Nothing in my room, not even bottles of water. Just my bed, subtle shakes, but vibrating enough to wake me up. It happened twice. Last time it happened was the summer of 2023. I wasn't sweating because I sleep with the fan on high all year round, so I couldn't have just randomly awoken due to me being hot in the middle of the night. There's no natural explanation that I can think of or find on the internet that helps. I can't be dreaming it because when I'm awoken in my bed, I'm still shaking. It's not sleep paralysis because I can move freely. I stand up and feel my bed and it vibrates back and forth as if someone is rubbing my shoulders trying to wake me. I have no pads. When this happens, I just go back to sleep when I can't figure out what the cause is. I feel like this is the right subreddit to post this. Does this strange phenomenon happen to anyone else? Is there an explanation for it? Or is the phenomenon not something that naturally occurs in our dimension? I'm not a firm believer of the paranormal, but I love watching scary movies. It's entertaining and funny to me. I go to church sometimes. I guess I can call myself born-again Christian. Was formerly Catholic, never received communion, but I cannot grip religion to where I can submit to it, because I simply just don't believe in it, or the God they preach about in the Bible. Church is just a place of peace and love for me. I don't know if that happens to have any religious significance. I am sure that someone went through something similar or can share what they think happened. Camp attack. So this happened about 7 years ago. I was around 19 or 20 and I was a scout leader. We had this huge camp in the middle of a forest. The nearest city was 10 or 15 minutes away. So a secluded area in a forest. So every year in the month of July we would have an international scout camp. We were the hosting country usually because of the size of our camp. But before these scouts from different countries arrived, we would go to the campsite and start the preparations. We would go around 2 to 3 weeks in advance and start building the tents and cleaning the sites. The preparation team had around 20 people, 10 to 12 men and the rest women. We were all in our late teens or early 20s. I don't know if anybody's been in a scout before, but the first thing every scout does in a camp is that we set up a flag. If any scout from another country manages to steal your country's flag, it's a dishonor, and the entire team would be packed up and sent home. Plus, they can kidnap a team member from different teams. As for fun, but can keep you hostage for days until you get saved. So it's like a game, but a little more intense. We have baseball bats for protecting ourselves, but we can use all below the belt, not for upper body attacks. Sounds brutal. So here's where my creepy story begins, if that wasn't already creepy to begin with. One night our preparation team was done with everything, and the 2 countries from Europe, about 60 people, were set to arrive in the morning. We had nothing to do, so we set up a campfire and started singing and talking. We had our guards, people from the team, set up in different locations. 2 near the flag, 2 near the entrance, 2 in the jungle facing the river. So we were tired and decided to go to sleep. We would change guards every 2 hours. Each guard had a whistle. If an animal or a person was to come to the camp, they would blow a certain note of a whistle as an alarm of danger. I was an hour into sleep when I heard a whistle. I came out, saw everyone out. We ran to the direction where we heard the whistle from. One of our teammates claimed they heard 3 white figures running fast in the forest near the setup tents. We figured that the morning teams arrived early to set up to attack us and take hostage or steal our flag. We decided to stay awake and all of us just stood as guards. We didn't want to go home before even the fun had begun, so we started watching for signs. We had people set up in trees, we had some in random places, and we would hear constant whistles and radio sounds. We kept seeing white shadows running fast in the jungle. Me and 2 other people decided to check the empty tents. Couldn't find anything. Then we heard really, really loud laughter from a bush near us. It sounded like a woman laughing, so we started laughing too. We thought we found the other scout team near the bush, so we confidently walked to the bush with a flashlight. To our horror, there was no one. The next bush, a little bit deeper in the woods, a few feet from us, started shaking in a clear conversation between a few people speaking French in an accent. We could hear them clearly, so we checked there again and nothing. Then we saw a guy in a white t-shirt running fast in front of us. But his speed was weird. He's running so fast as if he was sliding. This is a forest. You can't run without making a noise, but he was making none. He was just sliding. We still looked at this as a joke and we had adrenaline, but it was more exciting to catch them more than anything else, really. These things continued for 2 hours. Constantly we would hear our code whistles from deep in the forest, but none of us could figure out who it was or where it came from. We would hear whispers of people speaking French and Armenian, but we couldn't find anyone there. By the way, the arriving teams were from Georgia, not a state, and from Uruguay. We had a few people coming from the US too, so no French teams there at all, so it was kind of weird. Anyways, after 2 hours of running in the forest in the dark, I got tired. I didn't take this too seriously, so I went back into my tent to sleep. It was me and 2 of my friends, so 3 women. As soon as I laid down, 10 minutes later I heard a car coming toward us. This area is not designed for regular cars to arrive. None of us or other teams had cars. A bus from the nearby city would drop us there and pick us up after the camp was over. So, no cars. Anyways, I heard a car coming straight towards our tent with high beams on. It was coming so fast, so we were frozen expecting it to hit us. It was seconds, no time to run. Then it had a stop right in front of our tent. We heard the door open, no footsteps. Just closed again, reversed, and left. I was shaking. It hit me that it's not even the other teams. They don't have cars. They were going to fly in and use the bus to get to this location in the morning. We got out. Everybody had seen the car. It was the Jeep, apparently. But no one got out. No one saw who they were. We stayed awake all night. We kept seeing those white-shirted men sliding around us. We could sort of hear laughters and French whispers all around our camp. There wasn't one person, but at least 20 people who were either messing with us or had plans to hurt us. In the late morning, we had the other teams arrive. Everybody came in and we had our leaders meeting in the afternoon. It was a protocol to have the leaders of the teams to let us know if they had planned an attack that failed. All the teams said they arrived in the morning, so they didn't even really... Well, they weren't even in the country at night. Up until this day, I have no idea who those people were. I have no idea what they wanted, and I have no idea why they spoke French or what they were trying to do. They never attacked or kidnapped anyone in the team. It was scary when I think of it. At the end of the day, this was a campsite in a forest, and forests can be places where cults and crazy people gather. Is my house haunted? We moved into our home a year and a half ago. Everything was great. I didn't have any weird feelings or bad thoughts on our house. It was built in 2006. It's on property in a semi-rural area. The old owner was an old man who passed away, so his kids sold the house. Anyway, a few months pass, and the mobile that my son's room is hanging from is light, and I noticed one day when I went in there, it was spinning on its own like semi-hard. There was no draft, no heat or AC coming from the vents. So I made note of it, but just brushed it off. Could have been anything, right? Well, a few months pass, the mobile only did that a few times, and it stopped and hasn't done it since. I always hear weird things in the house like bumps or creaks, but just thought it was the normal house sounds. Then these last 2 weeks, weird things have been going on. My son wakes up from a dead sleep. My husband and I were still awake watching a movie in the living room. My son gets up, standing in the corner of his crib, looking at the corner of his room, screaming like he was terrified of something and shaking from being so scared. We grabbed him, did a full search of the room because that's never happened before. He's never done this. The room was clear, nothing out of the ordinary. We rock him back to sleep. Then the next day, my husband's truck started acting weird. The volume would go up and down on its own, change channels, turn off and on by itself. Would pick a song and turn it all the way up on the radio. And when it was Bluetooth, it would choose its own song on my husband's phone and start playing in the speakers and would skip songs and so on. That lasted 2 days and hasn't done it since. My parents come to town. We haven't told them anything that was going on because we just kept brushing it off. The next day, my husband was at work. My son was with my mom, and I were just kind of bopping around town checking out the shops. My dad stayed back and decided he wanted to take a nap. No one was in the house. When we got back, he asked us if we left the TV on or not, maybe the radio or something in the house. I said we don't have a radio and no TVs were on. We told him he heard a woman singing or a radio playing music. He checked his phone, walked around the house, but couldn't find what it was that was doing that. We don't have close neighbors, and you wouldn't be able to hear a car radio from the street. But he thought it was kind of nothing, so he just took his nap. So that was it for about 4 days. Then a couple of days ago, my husband and I and our son were out of town. My brother-in-law was staying at our house, watching over the animals. We once again didn't mention anything that was going on, because there was a reasonable explanation, we thought. Don't know what it was, but we knew we could find one. Anyway, when we came back, he told us that there was a funny prank that we played on him. We asked him what he was talking about. He said making sounds through our camera, trying to talk to him and mess with him. We told him we never went on the camera while we were gone. I immediately went to go unplug it. There's no SD card, so we weren't able to go back and look at anything. It's just a live feed camera connected to the Wi-Fi. So that was the next thing. It just kind of put me on edge. Then today I'm sitting in the kitchen feeding my son breakfast, and I hear what sounded like a man coughing in the room right next to the kitchen. No one was home, and it was like a full coughing fit. The animals were all outside at the edge of the property, so I know it wasn't them. That freaked me out. I immediately go do a check in my son's room and my room, put my son in his crib, grab my gun, and walk to the other end of the house to check the room that I heard the cough from, No one was there. I did a full sweep of the house and couldn't find anything, but I know I heard a cough. Then I go outside and I see the barred sign door is open. The door is always locked and shut, and no one's been up there since last week. The only 2 people that have keys is my husband and his father. Neither of them had been up there. This was early this morning. I freak out, call my father-in-law and my husband, and leave to my in-laws' house thinking someone was in my house, and ran up to the barn. That's when I heard them. My father-in-law comes over and does a full sweep of the house. Nothing. And the barn. He didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Finally, I'm convinced someone is living there, in our attic maybe, or in the crawl space. That's the only thing that seemed to make logical sense. If I heard somebody in the house, and my dad hearing music, and my brother-in-law thinking he heard us talking to him through the camera. My husband does a full walk through the attic. Didn't find anything. Did a full walk through the crawl space. Once again, nothing. Now I'm thinking that there could be an entity in my house. There's just too many strange coincidences going on at once. I have a family friend that's a Native American shaman and a medicine woman. I asked her to come to the house to do a cleanse. I don't really know what else to think. My husband thinks I'm crazy, but said do whatever I needed to do to put my mind at rest, since I'm the one home all day with our son.